Welcome everybody. Welcome back to our second webinar of this EREC. I'm really happy to have all of you, and with me today are two special people from Back Market. It's Martin Hügli and Adrian Gruot, who will tell us a little bit about circular economy in e-commerce. So what is the current status and what is the future there, especially in electronics where they are right now? And yes, I don't want to tell any more. Welcome to EREC, everybody. We will have a little bit of time afterwards to answer questions, so be quick about it and put them in the chat here on the right. We will be able to see it and have a little time afterwards to answer all of these. Adrian, Martin, have fun. So nice to have you.
Thank you, Felix.
Thank you so much. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I hope we're going to be able to sort out the technical part of this. We're really looking forward to introducing you to our model of the circular economy for e-commerce. And presenting today will be Adrian and I. We're both from Back Market Germany here in Berlin. I'm currently in Munich in the home office, as many of you probably as well. But Adrian is in our Berlin office. We have a couple of questions for you to get started, and then we'll dive right in to the topic.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Martin. I'm super happy as well to be here and to, do this, present you this. Yes, the first thing we would like to ask you is actually to make you participate, to make it as much interactive as possible. So the first question we have for you is actually, when did you purchase your phone? And you should be actually seeing the question now on your screen. I hope so, at least. So yeah, we're asking you the question. We're going to use your answer for the presentation. I assume most of you have your phone right with you right now next to you. So I'll let you answer maybe a few seconds to see. I'm going to wait a bit for you to answer. And yes. I already see a few answers. Let's wait a tiny bit more.
Okay. I think we have a couple of answers. We're going to share. Yes. We're going to share the results in a second.
Absolutely. All right.
Okay.
Let's close this one. All right. So that was the first question. And the second one already is, what apps do you use most frequently on your smartphone? All right. You should see it again on your screen. There are many studies that shows that Europeans spend between 2 and 3 hours on their phone every day. So we are very curious of knowing what you spend your time on when using your smartphone. So again, we'll let a tiny bit of time. If you have any other types of apps that you use other than the ones that we display, you can absolutely add it on the chat. Let's wait a tiny bit more. All right. All right. So I think we have already a lot of answers. That's super nice. Up.
Poll closed.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. We're going to use it, and I'm already going to give the mic to Martin.
Good. Thanks so much, Adrian. let's get started on just some background. We want to walk you through what we do, why we do it, and give you a sense for, what the circular economy looks like in the example of electronics. So to start, many of you will probably remember this day. And that was a day in 2007 when Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, and that day kind of changed everything. It was a revolutionary phone. It was a clear, step up to everything that we had before. Many of you probably also remember the phones before the iPhone, the Nokia phones, the flip phones where you could open and close. But the iPhone really changed everything. And after that happened, the industry, was shocked. And then Google was very, very soon to release the Android operating system. And the way we use our phones changed dramatically, pretty much from 2007 onwards, right? What happened since then? Since then, pretty much every year, we get keynotes, we get new phones, and we hear all of these words, they're revolutionary, the fastest ever, incredible, stunning. So every year the industry is launching more and more technology, new great phones that they introduce to the market in these gigantic words. And what's happened since then is really interesting because the phones, in terms of functionality, didn't really change that much. What has changed was really the way the phones look. Now they have 3 cameras or 4 cameras instead of 1 camera. But in the core, the apps we use, and we're going to go to your answers in just a second, not a whole lot has changed. And so, every year Apple and Samsung and the big manufacturers introduce with a big marketing bang their new devices and present them as if they were, huge leaps. In effect, we think that most of us probably don't use all the functionality that's being offered. Who of you is actually using 5G on their phone? Who of you is, doing professional photography or running, quantum mechanic programs on their phones? Very few of us. Most of us, and actually maybe you can take a look at the answers, Adrian, most of us use email, WhatsApp.
Yes, emails and WhatsApp, 60%, and browser. That's the main ones. And I don't see anything in the chat out of this. So, yeah.
And another really interesting thing has happened. This is the price of the iPhone, and we're taking the iPhone as representative of all of the smartphones. This is a trend that has been observed with many other manufacturers as well. But what you see very clearly is the price tends to rise, and the devices get more and more expensive. So Apple and the manufacturers are very, very good at marketing these new phones and telling you how great they are while raising the prices. And interestingly, also the industry jumps in and starts to kind of make it seamless, intuitive, almost free to get these new phones. If they're bundled to a plan, for example, a data plan with a phone carrier, such as here from the US. So that leads to a very interesting phenomenon. Every 18 months, on average, the German consumer changes phones, and most of the German consumers buy new phones every 18 months. And so there's a very high number of new phones going into the market. And the question is, what happens to all the other phones, all the old phones that are not used anymore? Adrian, do we have stats from the poll? How often people, or what the age of people's phones were?
Yes, I can see here 60% of the phones were from less than a year. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's really.
So we're all part of, you know, that, and, you know, it's being made very, very easy to consume, you know, every 18 months on average, a new phone. And what happens is kind of an economic dependency. We're kind of locked into, we're forced into, you know, this kind of overconsumption, if you will, of, you know, new devices that in effect don't deliver that much more. You know, we still use them for email, we still use them for communications, for web browsing, for social media. We don't really need all of the, you know, new functionalities being introduced, you know, the extra speed, the extra precision on the screen. So the big question is what happens to the old devices? And right now, according to a recent study, about 200 million phones are in people's drawers in Germany alone, which is a huge number, right? But the phones don't just end up, you know, in our drawers, they also end up elsewhere. And so I'm gonna hand it over to you, Adrian, to kind of walk us through, you know, the environmental impact of this consumption, this continuous consumption of new devices.
Yes, so we buy a lot of new things. We buy a lot, and not a lot of people actually think about what happened to this phone, what it took for this phone to end up in your hands. And the problem is that the production system actually is pretty bad. It has several negative impacts. Producing and delivering such incredible machines requires a vast amount of natural resources and energy. So if you take the example of water, for example, a single smartphone needs 100 liters of water, according to a recent study, to produce, and it can create up to 72 kilograms of greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a lot. And if you take only the raw material that you need to take to make this phone, knowing that you need up to 69 elements for doing a phone and electronic device, then it's also super complex. You need to mine, you know, you require mining 34 kilogram of ore for this. So it's insane, the resource that you consume to produce this new device. And if you multiply it actually by the number of smartphones that we buy every year, so in Germany it's 22 million smartphones that we buy every year, then it's even bigger. It's so big that it's the equivalent in raw material of consuming a Berlin TV tower every 3 days. And you know how tall this tower is. It's the highest tower in Germany. It's the fourth in Europe. So it's so big that you can't even imagine when you get this phone in your hands. And we're only talking about smartphones. So imagine how much water, how much raw material, how much CO2 you would get if you would do it with a TV. So that's one of the things, but that's not the only problem. As Martin said, what happens when you buy a new phone? You have an old one, right? But what do you do with it? Either you keep it, you store it somewhere, or you discard it. That's when you get e-waste. The most recent numbers from 2019 bring us to 53.6 million tons produced annually worldwide. This is equivalent to about 2,000 space shuttles dumped into a landfill every day for a year. And that is only increasing. That's increasing at a super, super fast rate. Every year, it's at a rate of 3% that it's decreasing. And for the last 5 years, it was 21% increasing. And if nothing is done, the amount of e-waste will more than double by 2050. So it's a huge problem. It grows at a pace we can't really keep up with. And the other problem is that we don't recycle it. You know, less than 20% of e-waste is formally recycled. The rest, the 80%, is burned, or it ends up in a landfill. It's sent around the world to developing countries with looser regulations, and much of it is being informally recycled by hand by the poorest people, exposing workers to, you know, toxic substances and contaminating soil and groundwater. So that means a lot of toxic waste finding its way to places where it shouldn't be at all, to the detriment, of course, of health and environment. So that's a huge problem that we need to tackle. And well, fortunately, there are solutions. And the first one is pretty simple. And I'll give again the mic to Martin.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. So we see, before we jump on to the solution, let's just summarize. There are two big issues with the production of new. And we took the smartphone as representative for a lot of electronics. The first one is forced overconsumption, which basically is created by very clever marketing at prices that are increasing consistently. So an economic problem, if you will, because we're locked into every 18-month purchasing. For now it's 1,200, next year it's 1,300 euros, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're kind of forced into this economic dependency on the consumer side. And on the other side, there's an environmental crisis. I think that's the right word to use for it, that many of us are not aware of in the production, but also then afterwards, after usage, what happens in terms of environmental impact is catastrophic. So we're here to talk to you about a simple solution. And this is a statistic that is, when it comes to electronics, a relevant one. 12 years is the average lifespan of a car. No one would throw a car away after using it for the first 18 months or 24 months. No, it goes into a secondary market. Cars being used multiple times, and then it's quite obvious that we do that. Well, for smartphones, the average life is 2.6 years. So, the phones do go elsewhere. They're being used again, which doesn't make the average age 18 months, but 2.6 years, a little bit more than that. But it clearly shows that the life of a smartphone is very, very short, and that's a problem because mechanics is not like electronics. Mechanics in the form of a car is much more prone to defects. Mechanics typically are very defect prone. Electronics are very robust. I don't know if some of you remember these devices here. It's the Game & Watch from 1982, which was one of the first video games ever, and it was very convenient and you could play it. I actually played it when I was a kid, late in the 1880s. My grandfather bought me one of these, and I just couldn't put it down. And so, in the last weeks, I was reminded of that game because I have kids now too, and looked online, and I could find them, and they work perfectly. And yes, these devices have some mechanics. These are the button left and right, and these are typically the elements of the device that are most likely to break. The electronics work wonderfully. So electronics, and back to the smartphone, are very robust. You can use electronics for a long, long time. You might have to change a battery, or you might have to change some of the mechanics, a button or so. But the electronics are very robust, and they should be living much, much longer lives than the average of 2.6 years. Over to you, Adrian. This is interesting.
Yes, this is super interesting. So we understand that these smartphones should actually live longer than the 2 years, 3 years in our hands. But why don't we do it? Why don't we keep it actually? And when you know that 60% of the people that are buying new phones know that the old phone they have is still totally functioning. So we don't keep it. But what if we do? What if we do keep it a year longer, for example? A study has shown that if we held onto our phones a year longer, the emissions reduction would be equivalent to taking 630 36,000 cars off the road each year. And it would also reduce manufacturing material demand by 20 million kilograms per day. So that's super easy kind of to do and super small move, but the impact is huge. It's phenomenal. So we just need kind of, to change our behavior, but people are not aware of that. Most of the people don't know about that. They have no idea that this little move can make so much impact. We are all kind of under this marketing spell. We're all tempted, and of course it's normal. It's so well done, but we could actually do something pretty easily about that because those devices are still absolutely valuable. And it's the same for e-waste. If you can go to the other slide, Martin. E-waste represents a huge opportunity. The material value alone is worth 50 billion euros. There is 100 times more gold in a ton of mobile phone than in a ton of gold ore. And when talking about circular, when we think about circular, most of the people, recycling is often the go-to answer for manufacturers, but it's not really the number one solution. It should be more like a backup solution because, the problem with recycling is that it costs a lot of energy, a lot of money. Out of the 69 materials that we talked about just before in a smartphone, only 12 can be actually recycled. And that costs so much energy that it's not even worth it. It doesn't even make sense anymore. So if we want to think forward, we need to think more of a way to extend the life of the product and reuse the old electronics. And that's exactly what refurbishment is about. So first off, you minimize the amount of new products that needs to be produced. So you decrease the amount of pollution, water, mining that is required to produce the new device. It takes less energy and raw material to refurbish the devices than it does to make it from scratch. If you take again the example of the iPhone, you can get around 30 kilograms of carbon emissions less versus buying it new. And second, since you're buying a pre-owned phone, you keep this device in circulation and you're saving it from ending up in landfill. So the more we reuse our devices, the less waste we will generate as a society. And that means in the long run, decreasing the impact of tech in general. So, let's repair, let's reuse, let's go back to this, I feel that our grandparents were more used to that. They were, that's a generation that was giving much more value to things. They were used to keep things, to repair things, to clean it. And that's the thing we should think about, adapt it to our own era, of course, to our own innovations, but focusing on repairing, reusing is the right direction to take.
Thanks, Adrian. So we're now going to introduce you to the circular economy and e-commerce for electronics, and want to start with the status quo. So we now know that there is an economic problem with consuming new, over-consuming new. There's also a big ecological problem with that. We know that a solution is to keep using devices longer and keep them in the circulation longer. So, interesting what happened after 2007 when the iPhone was introduced. The first people, after a year and a half, after 2 years, the first people started to give their phones back. They were typically bundled with, phone plans. So a lot of people started to give the phones back. And so they ended up in back channels somewhere. And it was kind of like the Wild West. Second-hand phones were offered, started to being offered by a lot of merchants. You could see them pop up online. You could, buy them in shops. But it was the Wild West because there were absolutely, no securities for the customer. Where does the device come from? What happened to it before? Has it been tampered with? Was it repaired? What condition was it in? There were absolutely no norms. There were no standards. There was zero buyer protection. And very often, there also was a lot of fraud in that regard. So fortunately, over time, there was a real, ecosystem building around these, second-hand phones in that case. And the ecosystem started to mature. And that's also when the first refurbishers started to appear. And you could start to see differences in quality, differences in working standards. And that's also right around the time when back market was started in 2014, where you had the first ecosystem maturing, but for consumers still a big problem, right? If I buy used devices, what do I buy? Do I buy a phone that's been checked, that comes from a serious vendor, that has been repaired in very high quality? And where do I buy these phones? How do I know? That's basically, a quick look, and I won't go into all of these, little boxes, but that shows you how the ecosystem looks like, roughly. So, on top you have new device owners, where, it could be a leasing company that leases devices out. It can be consumers that buy them direct, or it could be, corporations. And when we put example, names in here, like Airbus, these are just representative, of course, for many, many others. And, after 18 months, devices typically go back. They go to insurance companies or mobile carriers, or they go back in shops, retail shops. And then these devices go further. These devices then go to brokers, they go to repair shops, they go to organizations, they're being sold B2B, and then they end up at merchants, basically sellers that sell these phones in the market. And here's also where back market enters. Back market is, in that regard, an e-commerce platform that connects the merchants with the consumers, and that establishes standards that are very clear for the customer, and gives the customer complete confidence and security in buying refurbished. And this is how it looks. That's just a quick look at our website. This is how, if you are buying a refurbished phone on back market, this is how you would do it. We, on the one hand, created technical conditions, so we try to make things really, really simple for the customer. Not every, refurbished phone looks the same. Some phones have scratches, and they tend to be actually the best values. Other phones look flawless and have been, completely restored, or are just, pretty much still in the same condition as when they were when they first were introduced in the market. And with a simple interface, we try to give consumers complete peace of mind. So we have, we offer warranties, we offer a right to return, and of course we make sure that every seller that sells on the platform is duly checked. We do a lot of mystery orders to make sure that the quality is top-notch, and the consumer can very easily on the platform purchase refurbished phones. Not just phones, you can buy pretty much any electronic device on back market. I'm using the phone as the most popular device, as kind of symbolic for all of the great electronics that don't have to end up in a landfill.
Martin, I have a question. I'm sorry. I can
Yep.
see it in the chat for the last slide is, why do we actually see only one merchant, and why also do we see this other number, this lila with 662? What is it about? What does it mean?
Okay. So it's a great question. On back market, we only offer the best quality device at the best possible price. So there are a lot of merchants offering on back market. Right now, we have about 1,500 merchants that offer devices. And based on our internal algorithm, which kind of looks at different things, it looks at the device, it looks at merchant quality, it looks at customer feedback. We only serve the best possible quality offer at the best possible price to the customer. So there's no need to kind of go through long lists of merchants and compare every seller and look for differences in price and feedback. We kind of centralize that and do that for the consumer, so that at any point in time the consumer gets the best quality device at the best possible price. And the second, you probably mentioned this here,
Yes.
is our trade-in. So whenever consumers buy a refurbished device on back market, they can also sell their old device back to back market. It then goes back into the circulation, will be refurbished, and then finds its way back on the platform as a refurbished device.
Thanks.
Great. So I think Adrian, you're going to walk us through a couple of numbers.
Yes, I'm going to show you how far we've come since 6 years actually. So far we're now a bit more than 500 employees around the world. We are open in 13 countries, and this is great because every time you open a country, it's giving this alternative to more and more geographical markets. So it's pretty exciting. And right now the pace that we are in is opening a new country every 5-7 weeks. So it goes really quickly now, and it's super encouraging. In 2020, we have sold 3 million products, and this month we actually reached the 5th million customer since the very beginning of our journey. So it's pretty encouraging. It's a big step for us. It proves that that we are right in the right direction. It proves that the customers are right as well in the right direction. We try to convince them. It shows to show them that they can be actors of this. So it's really nice figures. And if you look at the supply, you can also see a big growth. You can see on the merchant side that in only 2 years we have almost tripled the number of merchants on the platform. As Martin said, we're now 1,500 merchants active on the platform. And that means also that creates a job. So we create jobs. This industry creates a lot of jobs. And in terms of listings, we also have a lot of new listings every year coming in. We try to provide a very wide range of products to our consumers so that they really have no reason to buy new. And that's how far we've come. So that's absolutely great news. That's great news for us as a company, of course, but also for the environment, because it has an impact on the environment. And if you see our estimations, and you can go on the other slide, Martin. Yes, we try to estimate the impact that we have had on the amount of e-waste, the amount of raw material and CO2 emissions that our clients saved by buying refurbished. And you can see that cumulated right now, we are up to 1,600 tons of e-waste saved, 160,000 tons of raw material, and 260,000 tons of CO2. So that's absolutely, wonderful to see that for us. That's the proof that we can kind of leverage this economic model to thrive at environmental impact. And yeah, that's a good beginning, and we're only at the beginning, and we try to go forward. So
thanks. So just before we move on to the next section, to summarize here, Back Market has created a marketplace for consumers to find, discover, and also purchase high quality refurbished devices. At the advantage, of course, significantly better prices versus new. So, you can kind of break out of that every year more expensive, every year, being locked into, a new commitment. And on the other hand, you can save a lot of, e-waste and CO2. So overall, two net positives, right? So refurbished makes sense. The opportunities for an e-commerce such as back market are also very clear. I'm going to go back to just highlighting the car market real quick. For comparison, in Germany alone, it's about a 200 billion market, and it's roughly half-half. Half of the sales are new cars, half of the sales are used cars. And that's just in terms of euros. So it's the financial value of cars being sold. Of course, the numbers are much larger on the used side because the prices are cheaper. So every year, it's roughly 2/3 of the total numbers of cars sold are used cars, and about 1/3 is coming from new cars. And in electronics, again, at the example of the smartphone, this is where we're currently at. These are estimated numbers, but should be roughly accurate. The market for new is, in terms of volume, also in terms of units, significantly larger than the market for refurbished or used phones. And we think this also represents, the opportunity. We're convinced that consumption patterns will shift as a result of a lot of things, but mainly also awareness for the problem is going to be a key driver for people having more confidence and being more open to purchase refurbished devices versus new devices. And de facto, the difference between refurbished and new is almost none. We can say that in terms of quality. There were leaps made over the last couple of years and are continued to be made to ensure that refurbished devices operate at the highest possible quality, and the difference between new and refurbished has become minimal. So every consumer can be fully assured to purchase very high quality electronics on a secondary market, on in our terms the back market, for closing the loop, for reuse instead of recycling, and thereby making smarter, more sustainable decisions. Okay, in terms of challenges, of course there are a few, and I've already mentioned them. The marketing mindset of the big manufacturers is going to continue to focus on new, right? And we can expect every year new devices in more colors with more cameras, and even faster and even more beautiful and magnificent. And it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge for us and pretty much everyone in the industry to help people get out of that marketing spell. It is a problem because it's so easy, it's so tempting to upgrade, go for the latest, and a lot of devices have also become, in some regard, status symbols. So breaking that pattern, that marketing, that marketing spell that reigns over all of us, that's really challenging. And it happens mostly, it has to happen on the consumer side. And I think the more we can do on the ecosystem, and in terms of technology powering refurbished, the more we can do to show people how qualitatively great refurbished devices can be. I think a lot of that will help us help consumers break out of that marketing mindset. The second is also an awareness problem. Most consumers are not aware that the overproduction consumes a lot of resources, and then also the the disposal and the recycling of their devices is a problem. So just the awareness for this particular aspect needs to be sharpened, and we cannot communicate enough around the problem. Last or second last, the ecosystem has matured, but the ecosystem is still not at a very, very developed level. And that's why we are investing heavily into building infrastructure for the entire market. There seems to be a problem, so I'm just going to switch skip the next slide. So back market is developing a lot of services to support the ecosystem, whether repair services, shipping services, fulfillment services. So we know that it's just day one, and that if we want the industry to mature even faster, we will have to be part of the ecosystem. So we're investing heavily into building out various connecting parts of the value chain and giving our sellers access to the tools and to the infrastructure that we're building, which is going to be key. But it's also a very complex and resource intensive topic. And last but not least, policy. We currently see a lot of focus on especially the recycling part, which is great, and I think it closes a critical gap to do that. But at the same time, we feel that the reuse and repair aspect of the solution is not given enough visibility. Also in policy, a good example is, for example, the sales tax. Sales tax on refurbished devices are at the same rate in most countries than sales tax for new devices. We think that's a policy that would be very beneficial to the consumer, but also support the overall environmental impact and the general move to kind of refurbished and reused. If we had a reduced VAT, a reduced sales tax. But this is one example of many, and so we're actively building a lot of advocacy for the reuse and recycle topics. And that is, I want to be mindful of the time. That concludes a quick, very, very quick look at back market. Thanks for everyone who's joined. I think we have a couple of questions already in the chat, but we're now very happy, of course, to answer any questions you might have.
Yes, thank you, Martin. Thank you, Adrian. What a great presentation. Thank you for that, for these insights into what you do. Really interesting how that refurbished market works. And yes, you're of course completely right. There are a few questions coming in, which I would love to ask you. But first, I would like to extend special thanks to you from our side, because as maybe some of you already know, Back Market has sponsored our little raffle around eRec. So you can win a few of their products, which are either completely new or as good as new here on eRec. You can, after the webinar, of course, head over to the eRec website and enter to win great prizes. Thank you for that, Martin and Adrian. But now back to you and your questions. Here came one in about the warranty. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, because as we saw, you are not the seller yourself, you are just giving out the platform and the merchants are selling the product. How does it work with the warranty?
Good question. Typically, when you sell a used device, if you're a seller and you sell a used device, you have to offer by law 12 months of Gewährleistung in German, of seller warranty. On back market, there are two elements that are quite unique. The first is that we extend or expand on the legal requirements. So typically, after 6 months, there's kind of a reversal of, back to the consumer, and the consumer then has to prove that, the device actually came with an error, so that, the legal, Gewährleistung or warranty requirement is quite weak in that regard and doesn't really protect the consumer. So we require from all sellers that they, guarantee across the full 12 months of their, seller warranty, to not require from the customer, that proof, that reverse proof. The second is that we put standards in terms of response times and resolution times, and then we extend that by another 24 months. So we, in back market, if you purchase a device, you get 36 months of total warranty. 12 months are covered by the seller typically, and then back market gives you a 24-month warranty extension after those 12 months. So technical defects are covered up to 3 years.
Perfect. Yeah, that's really nice. 3 years is a lot, especially if you're thinking about buying a refurbished product and you're sure that it will be good for 3 years. I think that's a pretty nice deal. Thank you for this this information. And you came in another question, which is very specific, but maybe you can just tell us a little bit about the future. Here came someone asked about blockchain, whether it would be possible to use that in the future for the logistical side of it, to make it possible to see where the product came from, and of course increase transparency and credibility. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are about the future in 5 or 10 years about refurbished products, especially in the consumer electronic market.
I think it's a great question. We have at the status quo immediate opportunities to ensure we know where the device is coming from. We're just not using those opportunities across the board. So every device, for example, has a unique identifier, and you can look up where a device is coming from, and you can kind of check a device's history. The thought of blockchain is fascinating, because basically what you would do is you would put an open history to every single device, right? So we haven't actively thought about blockchain in the design of the services, but it's a fascinating thought. Most immediately, over the next 1 to 2 years, we will have to solve some of the basics. Before we can move to blockchain-like technology, it requires some of the basics to be solved. And I think in the next 1 to 2 years, we will have to consolidate a lot within the industry to then possibly move to a solution like that. But I really like the thought.
Thank you very much. Yes, all right. If any of you got some questions, you can just now put them here to my right into the question box. And yeah, let me have a look if there are any other coming in. Excuse me that I'm looking down here a little bit on my computer. Yes, that would be, I think that would be interesting if you could tell us a little bit about how you work with your supporters, with your merchants work. So do they approach you? Do you go out and look for them? And do you only work with the merchants directly, or do you offer services including that, like for companies that work higher up in the supply chain of refurbished products, like the ones collecting these things? Do you have platforms in place about that help connecting these people as well?
So, to answer the first question, we do both. We actively approach merchants, but we also, of course, get a lot of requests from merchants to join the platform. And we're very, very selective. There are a lot more merchants that would, like to sell on back market, but we are on purpose very, very selective and limited in that regard as a platform. Not everyone can sell on back market because we need to ensure that quality is where we need it to be. Of course, every merchant goes through a business screening. Every merchant goes through a quality screening. Every merchant fulfills a technical integration, and then for every merchant that is new on the platform, we start slowly. We start to build up the first sales. We then evaluate the quality. We look at customer feedback, and then slowly dial the merchants up. But the merchants are channels are both outbound and inbound. Regard to your second question, yes, there is, and we call it refurbishment as a service, which basically allows any brand to sell refurbished through back market. And that's especially relevant for all of the brands that are not, that are not experienced in the whole refurbishing and the logistics. But these are brands that are especially relevant for us. That's where we really want to invest, is going beyond the smartphone. Any device that we use on a day-to-day basis, be it gaming consoles, be it hair dryers, be it electronic scooters, all the electronics are relevant to us, and so we want to give these brands access to our platform by offering refurbishment as a service, so that basically covering the complete value chain, which is really interesting and very, very well liked by a lot of the brands that we approach with it.
Very nice, totally. While we go into overtime a little bit, but I've got a few more minutes until the next webinar starts, because here came in one last question, which goes very well hand in hand with the webinar I had before that one, because I was talking to Andreas Kunter from the company Comtech. They are building machines for recycling, and they are thinking in the future about refurbishing their big machines as well. And here came in the question from Nadia about why do you focus on electronics, and you said it already, it's going to expand into other markets, but what is your reasoning behind that?
Well, electronics is the easiest one to tackle. Everyone has a smartphone, everyone purchases a smartphone, and that's also where we can have the most immediate impact. So, for us, electronics was the best way to start, the best way to start to grow, and build systems and processes around something that scales, which is much more difficult in other categories. So now we're using the scale that we've achieved in, smartphones, tablets, laptops. These are kind of the core electronics that consumers purchase most frequently or are most interested in. We're able to use that positioning now to then expand into all the other categories. So it's very simple. That's where we had the most demand, and that's where the category that allowed us to scale.
Very nice. Yes, of course. So yeah, but I think it will of course expand on your side to other things, as you said, and I think the whole idea of using refurbished products will only grow, as you said already, and I'm really eager to see how that will affect our whole lives. Well, all right, but for now, here comes in another question, but I would say thank you for now. For anyone else who got another question, you can head over to the booth of Back Market, and they've got a live chat where you can just put in your questions, and if you've got any further interest in doing business with them, Of course, you can contact them to make an appointment with maybe Adrian or Martin themselves or any of their colleagues. And yeah, for now, I can only say thank you for being here. And yeah, have a nice day. I would welcome all of the participants to join our next webinar with Connor Dowd from AMCS, who will talk a little bit about software in the recycling industry and how that will change in the future. And yeah, Martin, Adrian, the last words are yours. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. It's nice. We are really going to take the time every day for responding to your answers. So if you have some, really don't hesitate. And yeah, thank you so much, Martin.
All said. Thanks.
Bye-bye. See you
Bye.
soon. See you soon.